Wonderful. Thank you, Carrie. Hello, everyone, and thank you again for joining us today. I'm very excited to be here with Frank Malfi. We will be going over the 6 most critical steps for a successful data.com migration. And on the agenda, we're going to be talking about preparing and creating a plan, leveraging the Traction on Demand tool, confirming your business use cases, making changes and testing, training your users for the new experience, and then talking about the hard cutover. So Frank Malfi, he's our resident Salesforce expert, data.com migration expert. He's going to be walking us through the checklist, and then again, we will have time at the end for questions. So without further ado, Frank, I will let you take it from here.
Great, Maggie. Thank you very much, team. I really appreciate that. Welcome to this glorious fall day here. I'm over here in the Northeast, and hopefully you're having a great day where you are. But before we go into this first slide here, I just want to mention a couple of things. One, just a reminder why we're here, because Salesforce is retiring data.com. And as many of you know, that will be retiring at the end of July of 2020. Of course, there are some contracts that go past that, and Salesforce will honor those. But since we announced the platform D&B Optimizer for Salesforce, along with D&B Hoovers, to replace the data.com suite of Clean and Prospector, we've done a lot of work with onboarding hundreds of customers onto our new product. And some of you may not know this, but Optimizer is a Lightning Data certified application. And what that means is that we're leveraging a platform built by Salesforce that replaces data.com for all intents and purposes to allow third-party data providers like ourselves to come into their ecosystem and be integrated fully into the platform, and do so using some services that are very specific to those applications. And we're leveraging that, and Optimizer is one of those. So just a reminder, again, we're doing this because the data.com is going away, and the migrations are happening, and they're happening fast and furious. And one of the things I wanted to do today was sort of go over some of the critical things that we've learned from those customers while they're going through this migration. So we're going to start with number 1. And I know it sounds simple, like, create a plan. Of course, we all want to do that. But the thing you may not know is that depending on the integration that you have with data.com, some customers have done this in as few as, I would say, like 30 days, but their instance happened to be very, very simple. And we've got customers who've literally taken months because their org is very complex. And so the thing you should keep in mind is that you want to first look at your data.com expiration and work backward from that. And we recommend at least a 60-day time frame. Sometimes it'll be more, and it'll really be more depending on the next bullet, which is knowing about the components that are associated with data.com. And the reason why it gets complex is because you may have things like triggers and Apex classes and workflows that are tied to some of the data.com specific components. The thing you need to remember is that when data.com goes away, those components that belong to data.com are also going to go away. At the end, if we have time, I'll show you a slide that talks specifically about which components go away. But a customer, like the company object, will go away, where it stores all the D&B data. And of course, there are going to be some certain elements that are very specific to the package that are on the account, the lead, and the contact object. They're going to go away. And if you have processes and reports and workflows that are tied to that, well, that will have to be modified accordingly. But what makes that even harder is that if you are using the data.com specific API set, that can take even a longer amount of time to make the migration, because by definition, that's custom coding associated with those APIs. And as we've seen with several customers who are using that, it does take a bit more time to make that transition. And they're transitioning to something called Direct Plus. It's our API set that customers can adopt into the Salesforce platform. And there are API calls. They're not exactly the same, but we have customers who are migrating using our Direct Plus API set. Again, that will take additional time, so keep that in mind. The other thing is to make sure that that this can be a rather seamless process for some customers, but you really need to do your due diligence on all of those components. And the one thing we do know is that when metadata from data.com is left in certain places, like the data integration rules, we know that bad things can happen because certain things will break. And so we do encourage you all to make sure that you plan accordingly, depending on the integration complexity that you have with data.com. On the next slide, we're going to show you is a tool that's actually going to help you manage that complexity a bit more. Back last year, I think we talked with Salesforce about this and our partner Traction. And Salesforce actually asked our partner Traction to create a tool. And it turns out this tool is actually going to be very, very important to all of our data.com migrating customers. And that tool is called the data.com Dependency Finder tool. It's a free application on the App Exchange, and it was designed by Traction with Salesforce's blessing to really go in and explore all the metadata associated with data.com. And why is that important? Because all the things I just mentioned that you really have to account for are basically noted in this tool. It's going to go find things like formula fields and validation rules, workflows, triggers, Apex classes, the data integration rules, and of course, many of our customers are going to have lots of reports. And it will detail exactly where the metadata is located, and it's going to give you a dashboard. It's going to give you a progress tracker, some reports to look at that. And so all of our customers who've taken possession of this are using it, and it's actually giving them a lot more insight as to the amount of work, so that when they go back to their plan, they can say, wow, I've got thousands of reports. In some cases, we know customers who've had many, many reports and many, many classes of code, some of which they didn't even know about. And so it turns out to be vitally important in their planning to make sure that they account and allot for the proper time to do the migration. So keep that in mind. That tool will come in handy for that purpose, and then we're going to come back to it again at the end, and I'll tell you why later. In our next slide, the thing to keep in mind here also is that as we work with customers, there's a few things that I noticed specifically about the migrating customers. Some of them who've had data.com for many years built and customized data.com based on the use cases they had back then. And today, some of those use cases may or may not apply, especially when you consider how Optimizer runs today, and that it's tied to this Lightning data platform, and that it really is architected differently than the way data.com was architected. And we could talk about that in a whole other session about what those differences are. But and why it's important is because sometimes the use cases that were employed back then or the customizations that were employed may not necessarily be required today. And so we encourage our customers to go back and really look at those use cases to make sure they are still applicable, and whether the technology that we have in Optimizer meets those needs without having to use a customized approach. So I would encourage you all to think about that and really detail each use case from your business. A second thing that we noticed is that Prospector in data.com was a very, it was a very scaled down version of a prospecting engine. And when you compare that to D&B Hoovers, D&B Hoovers provides it's a feature-rich application that's been around for a long time, and it does a whole lot more than the data.com Prospector application performed. And so With that, there are a lot more features available and a lot more ways to integrate data into your platform. And what we're finding is with the combination of Optimizer and D&B Hoovers, it does a whole lot more than Data.com ever did. And so we encourage customers to look at that and look at those capabilities. And again, look at them with the lens of addressing the use case. There are things like, for example, looking at corporate family trees and other data that's in Prospector that typically you wouldn't find in the data.com application. And so we find customers looking at that and finding that they're able to address the existing use cases and perhaps even more as they look forward into integrating data inside of Salesforce. And then the third thing with the advent of our partner Traction, and they've been a great partner with us, by the way. They've been around with Data.com. Traction hierarchies were used in Data.com world, and now they're transitioning their tool to help to work in the Optimizer world, and it's working seamlessly there as well. And the reason why we encourage customers to think about Traction hierarchies is because their tool is very good at some more complex use cases and management of the D&B hierarchies. And in addition to being able to view it, they allow custom hierarchies. They actually populate the parent relationship field inside of Salesforce, and that's where they maintain the hierarchies and allow you to have different roll-ups associated with that, in addition to your own custom views. And so it's a very sophisticated tool, allowing for a better use and management of our hierarchies. And so we find customers who have very specific use cases around that, leveraging that tool to address their business. So that was number 3. And number 4, we're going to talk about making changes and testing. And again, it sounds very basic, but I want to walk through each of these components because from a technical lens, we know some things that are very important in your transition. And of course, now that you had the opportunity to sort of evaluate what's in your data.com org, if you ran the tool, it would give you some insight in terms of where the metadata is associated. Now you've gone through your use cases and you know what your business is looking for. And now you physically have to do the work. You physically have to make this transition from data.com into Optimizer. And so there's some things here I want to share with you that I believe are very important. So one, I mentioned this already, the Traction tool, very important in terms of providing the insight. So we're making that as a standard part of our recommendation when you're onboarding with us. Our onboarding team, when you're taking possession of the license for Optimizer, is going to recommend that you use that tool. Second thing is that in the data.com, you already had some field mappings associated with that. It's the foundation found in the admin portion of data.com. And then there you actually have some D&B Optimizer. You have some data integration rules. And those can be used as the basis for establishing the data integration rules that you're going to find in D&B Optimizer. There's going to be 4 of them, one for the account, one for the lead, one for the contact on the lead, and one for the contact. And so you'll want to use that as your foundation for the mappings going forward. Another technical note is that data.com, and I know it sounds crazy, and we've talked to Salesforce about this, but data.com technically cannot be uninstalled from your sandbox. And that's because the production sandboxes are tied from a licensing perspective to your production orgs. And so the licensing does not go away. And so it will stay there, but you can disable some of the things. There's a couple of data integration rules that you can disable with that. And there are batch jobs that you may be running. And of course, you want to terminate those before you decide to run Optimizer, because you want to make sure that the cleaning is occurring from one place and one place only. So just keep that in mind. Number 4, data.com and D&B Optimizer both have similar custom objects and field names. So, data.com, there was a company object, and that's going to go away. And so a new one's going to be introduced. The DUNS number field that's associated with data.com on your account object, for instance, That's going to go away. Of course, we're going to introduce a new DUNS number field. And then there are a bunch of other fields, which I can list for you at the end here. But the thing to keep in mind is that when you go to create them, they may look similar. So you want to make sure you don't confuse those in your environment, and make sure you're testing against the correct fields and the correct objects. Number 5, and kind of related to number 4, when those fields go away, for instance, the NAICS field, which I know sounds a little bit crazy, is associated with data.com package, that field will physically go away. And so if you want to continue to have the NAICS field, for instance, on the account object, then you'll need to create a custom field for NAICS and then do the mapping accordingly to the new custom object that you're going to find in Optimizer. So just keep that in mind, that you'll need to make sure you take note of these, which fields are going to go away, and then decide based on your use cases if that data needs to remain in those objects, and of course create the custom fields associated with that. And last but not least, if you have DUNS numbers, and I know I said the DUNS number field was going away, when you make this transition, it's actually pretty easy, because when we establish Optimizer and data.com together, we actually use the DUNS numbers that data.com was using, and we use that in our matching. And believe it or not, the migration happens pretty seamlessly with regard to the data. You don't have to worry about copying data from one place and copying it to another. Optimizer will take care of all that, as long as you retain the DUNS numbers. And so we've had some customers, for instance, who allow data.com to expire. And of course, when they do that and you don't back up DUNS numbers and row IDs and things like that, that data is gone. And so I guess another point there would be, make sure that you do back up that data to make sure that in case data.com does expire before you get your project done, you don't lose any of those assignments with that. Let's go to the next slide, Maggie. Okay. And so on number 5, the thing to keep in mind as well, when I mentioned about the re-architecture of the Lightning Data Platform versus data.com, is that for the most part, your users are going to have a new experience, right? And you want to make sure in your plan you account for time to take your users through their use cases, and make sure you know where they go in terms of being able to point and click in the right places. Few things that you need to know. You can see in the bullet number 1. First of all, the data in Optimizer is updated with greater frequency, and the automation is different. So it happens automatically in terms of updating the custom objects, and the frequency in which that data is being maintained is automatic. We actually share our data now with Salesforce on a daily basis, and so the data that we give to them is fresh in their cloud, and then the custom objects are going to be updated on a 15-day basis automatically by the Lightning Data /Optimizer platform. So that's very different than the way admins were taking care of the data before. And that brings us to number 2, those batch jobs that we're running, as an example, they're no longer required, because the Lightning Data Optimizer platform is a virtual platform. It's running 24/7, and the behavior associated with that looks for certain things to occur in the various objects, depending on the data integration rules, and that data is automatically cleaned. So you can see right away, the maintenance of the platform is going to be very different than it was in data.com. They're taking care of a lot of the things associated with the maintenance of that. And then last but not least, the thing that your users are probably going to be most concerned with is something called the clean button, which is now replaced by the check for new data button if you're using the Lightning UI, the Lightning user experience with Salesforce. So just keep that in mind, that in addition to the maintenance of the data being different, the user experience, especially around the user interface, is going to be very different, especially if you're in the Lightning UI. And then last but not least, it's this thing called the hard cutover. The reason why I'm sharing this is because some customers have asked, well, was it better to do a pilot, like side by side, and try to compare fields, or is it better to just do a hard cutover? And so we talked with Salesforce about this, and we totally agree that doing pilots is probably not a good idea because it's very hard to keep records clean using data.com and Optimizer in the same place, and it creates a lot of confusion. And so it's not recommended. And almost all of our customers, if not all of them, have really taken the approach of using a hard cutover, which means that you disable the data integration rules and the batch jobs in your sandbox. You allow Optimizer to come up and basically replace those use cases that you had already invested in, and then you check for the metadata, which brings us to number 2. Before that expiration of data.com, you're going to want to run the traction tool again to make sure that none of the metadata associated with data.com is in your org. And so after you've done the migration, you actually stood everything up, and you've done your transition. If you run the traction tool again, it will actually tell you, you can run it as many times as you want, it'll tell you exactly where the metadata is located. And of course, if you see it still existing in places it shouldn't be, you'll want to be able to address that. Excuse me. Number 3, keep in mind, again, once the data.com expires, all the objects associated will go away, right? So just keep that in mind. I can't stress that enough. That and you don't have to worry about uninstalling data.com. It'll actually go away on its own, and it'll take those objects away along with it. And then the final note here, and I'm running a little late, Maggie, I'm sorry. The data.com report package that you may have installed can be uninstalled. And so prior to your expiration of data.com, you want to make sure that you uninstall the data.com report package. So that's just a high-level synopsis of the things we've learned along the way with the migrations. And I've worked with many, many customers in doing that. There are other things associated with the migration which you need to be aware of, but if we have an opportunity to have a conversation around that, I'll definitely give you some more pointers about what to look for. So with that, we're going to leave this up on the screen here. These are the objects I talked about. They're physically going to go away, and this will be provided to you in the presentation.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Yes, so we will be, anybody that attended today, we will be providing a recording of the session and be sending over the deck so that you can reference it when you're making your plans. But really, that is all that we have for today. We did have one question, Frank, that came in. I think that you addressed this a little bit earlier, but we had a question on the average implementation time to transition from data.com specifically to the D&B Optimizer for Salesforce product. Can you speak a little bit more to the variations that can happen for different sized companies and instances?
Yeah, I think I mentioned at the very beginning, but we've seen customers do this in as few as 30 days, but that is those are far and few in between, and those only happen with orgs that are literally out of the box, no customizations, and not a lot of use cases associated with those. But if you have a sophisticated org where you're using APIs, that time frame can be much longer, and we've seen some customers take up to anywhere from 3 to 6 months to actually migrate. It really depends on their ability to address the Apex code on the APIs in an expedient manner, basically.
Great. Yeah, I mean, it sounds to me like the moral of the story here is to, make sure that you are assembling your team, understanding your use cases, and really getting ahead of it so that you can understand the complexity of your organization's structure and what the transition will look like. We are definitely happy to help. So, we are coming right up on the 30-minute mark, and that is really all we have for today, but I did want to mention we will be at Dreamforce in San Francisco, in November. So, please feel free to come by our booth and we can talk a little bit more about, the Data.com replacement and Dun & Bradstreet's other sales and marketing solutions. Or if you want some additional information, you can go to this URL here for more on Data.com transitions. And then, we have great support all across the organization for this. Frank Malfi and David Aldinger are very technical solution engineers. They can, talk speeds and feeds with you. But, please feel free to reach out to your Dun & Bradstreet account manager or our resources here. And Frank, if you have nothing else, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you, everyone, so much for coming.
Thank you, everybody.
All righty. Thank you. Bye.